Hello everyone, myself Harmeet Korkochar, Assistant Professor Mass Communication. Welcome to this lecture on private television news media and representation in India. This lecture is part of your paper on news and society. The previous module on private television news and representation in India sketch out the business of news and its bearing on the content, particularly the way in which class, gender, and nation are constructed within it. This module extends the discussions by bringing to the fore some other content practices prevalent in news channels today, mediated by the demands of the market. By doing so, it also highlights some of the ethical and regulatory concerns emergent around it. News as entertainment. A major thread of discussion within the contemporary news scholarship on India dwells on how pressures of TRPs and advertising revenues translate in the blurring of boundaries between the previously distinct genres of news and entertainment. So, alongside traditional news segments, news channels also have features on celebrities, glamours, films, music, and lifestyle. In fact, what sells most in news today is 3 C's: cricket, crime, and cinema. The rising popularity of Hindi news channels in particular is based on a menu of celebrity, gossip, sleaze, cricket, spirituality, superstition, and more. Such practices together constitute tabloization of the medium. This is heightened during war, violence, and disaster, situations that provides visually stunning images. With round-the-clock channels, the screen has to be constantly buzzing. This has completely distorted the concept of breaking news or an exclusive, with each channel claiming one almost all the time. Serious news itself is being packed to convey meanings of excitement, such as hidden camera exposes. Although many channels take up some investigative stories or even campaigns, such as on corruption, unfair legal trials, or violence against women, but a lot of such coverage is also in a tabloid format. For a political story to sell, it must be sensational. For an investigative story to sell, it must blow the lid off someone in a spectacular way. And for the social concern story to grab attention, it must be really sexy case of rape or case caste warfare. There are countless instances of sensationalism in television news coverage, but one of the most prominent cases is the coverage of terror attacks in Mumbai in November 2008. On the evening of November 26, 2008, India's financial capital, Mumbai, was held siege by terror, with gunmen killing people at several spots and holding 2 5-star hotels hostage for over 60 hours, battling a massive combat operation. At the same time, another kind of battle was on within the Indian television news media. Critics describe the live coverage of operation as TV terror for jingoistic, aggressive, and often factually incorrect reporting by channels amidst a competitive flurry of breaking news and exclusives. In this highly charged atmosphere, certain journalists on a particular occasions acted in a manner that was less than ethical. Facts were presented sporadically, out of context, and sometimes incorrectly. Rumor and speculation was sought to be passed off as facts. As such, media focus was exclusively the Taj and the Oberoi hotels. The CST train station, littered with bodies of migrant workers, conspicuously missed the screen. Enough is enough. This statement made by one of the India's known socialites and a Taj regular was picked up by the English channels as a key news caption to declare their zero tolerance for terror and the political establishment. The socialites representing the public in TV talk shows mouthed the same sentiment with the suggestions such as stop paying the taxes, get army rule, war is way out, and let CEOs run this country. This telecast were not only the jingoistic but also highly irresponsible, as sensitive information was shared which could have been potentially used by the terrorists and their minders and compromised the security of the hostages. TV channels continued to telecast sensitive information jeopardizing people's lives. They told everyone where the commandos were approaching, the Taj and the Trident hotels. From they showed us just where the commandos had landed on the rooftop of Nariman House. They also helpfully let us know that the electricity connection to the Nariman House was cut off and that the NSD had night vision equipment and would launch an attack at night. News distortion and ethical issues, as is seen in the Mumbai case. In this race for revenues, a number of professional ethics seen as integral to journalism are often disposed. One important ethical concern relates to privacy. In India, the right to privacy is recognized in law under Article 19. The Press Council of India also maintains that this right cannot be infringed upon, except it outweighed by the concerns of public interest. Though concepts such as privacy and public interest lack precise definitions, they do not lack substances in the confusion between privacy and public interest. The media at times oversteps its rights. The media is sometimes guilty of sensationalizing a story to satisfy what is believed to be in the interest of the public. Such instances are now almost a routine affair. For instance, in order to garner more eyeballs, news channels often disclose identity of the victims of sexual assault, even though it violates Section 228A of the Indian Penal Code. In one such case, India TV carried out Operation Gang Rape, which had visualized of a gang rape video. In another case involving the gang rape of a journalist at Shakti Mills, Mumbai. Over enthusiastic and insensitive journalism even landed up at her home while she was still in hospital, startling the neighbors who had no clue about the journalist's plight. The lack of ethical responsibility in media is starkly at display in distortion of news items. Since television reports only show what is captured on camera, so many a times it can be distorted depending on what the camera perspective is and how images are presented with narration. Balancing can be tricky when journalists are working within tight deadlines, which is more often than not in the case. Also, news bulletins occasionally ignore what they cannot film or visualize, which is why there is much more news in the papers than on television. The rewards for distorting and dramatizing events are surpassing those for maintaining credibility, and the techniques that promote glamorization and drama. However, entertainment, sensationalism, and distortion can sometimes be combined in toxic mix. It is not uncommon now for news channels to deliberately relay information that is false or unauthentic for higher TRPs. Among the countless such cases, one of the most noted is the coverage of Arushi Talwar case. On May 16, 2008, a 14-year-old girl, Arushi Talwar, is the only daughter of a well-off dentist couple, was found murdered in their house in Noida. Days later, their 40-year-old servant, Hemraj, was also found dead within the premises. The case created waves for its many conflicting and sensational findings by the police and the Central Bureau of Investigation, which included honor killings by the father when he saw the victims in an objectionable, though not comprising position. The Hindi news channels feeding on these early investigative conjectures fashioned the tragic incident as a soap opera, its dramatic twists and tales buzzing the screen every hour. Pronouncing verdict before trial, the channels manufactured endless plots around the incident laced with the most potent ingredient of pop fiction: sex. A few of the many stories that screamed from the screens included: the servant raped and murdered the daughter. The parents murdered the daughter because she had found out about their illicit extramarital relationship. The parents are involved in sex rackets, etc. Within the figurative space of television news, the parents as well as daughters were indicted of being loose character. The girl's photographs and transcripts of her blogs, email, SMS chats with her boyfriend and friends were laid bare for public gaze and judgment. One news channel even telecast an MMS, that is multimedia messaging service, of a perverse sexual act between a girl and a boy, claiming the girl to be Arushi. It is not only the girl, however, who was consumed for profit, but also the servant victim, whose Nepali background was constantly highlighted to reinforce middle class paranoia about working class ethnic servants. The ravenous eye of the camera reporter chased and captured every hearsay about the story, brewing it for a delightful menu of breaking news. Special reports, exclusive SMS polls, chat shows, and experts' opinion, and even enacted version of Kya hua us raat? What happened on the fateful night? A study by the Center for Media Studies at Delhi revealed that between May 16 and June 7, 6 channels beamed programs on the murder for 39.30 hours out of 92 hours of prime time, from 1900 hours to 2300 hours. The result, the popularity of shows and reports based on this crime story, claimed the highest viewership on Indian television for a stretch of days, crossing even the top selling Indian Premier League bonanza around the same time. As indicated in the television rating points TRPs conducted by different agencies, viewers across homes savored every update on the feast sitting through endless advert break that multiplied advertisers swarmed into cash in the TRPs. To both the advertisers and channel owners, their crime conquest gave a lasting high. So much being the chase for revenue that one of the most successful serial production houses in India, Balaji Productions, jumped in to produce in their hit serial Kahani Ghar Ghar Ki, the story of every household. A few episodes about a teenage girl and honor killing, lending way to the lurid version. As its previous began to flash across the host channel, Star TV, Noopur Talwar, the mother of the victim, appealed to the Ministry of Child and Women's Welfare to stop the telecast since it exploited her family tragedy. In response, the ministry sent prohibited orders to the channel. However, despite the orders, the channel went ahead with the screening, claiming that the episode bore no resemblance to the incident. On 28 August 2007, Live India showed such an operation about a school teacher in Delhi, Uma Khurana, in which it was claimed that Khurana was running a prostitution racket in which she pushed senior school children. A teenage girl claiming to be Khurana's student revealed about this on camera. Soon after, Khurana was attacked and abused by a mob of parents. She was thrown out of her job and was also arrested and harassed by the Delhi police. On investigation, it was found the charges were false and that the sting had been concocted by her student, an aspiring journalist, along with the reporter to whom Khurana owed some money. The story of sting operations in India began in late 1990s when news outlet Tehelka exposed match fixing by prominent cricketers and clandestine defense deals by members of BJP-led NDA coalition and army personnel. The operations drew a lot of debate on the ethics of using deceptive tactics for such endeavors. But they set a trend for other channels to follow. According to Thakurta, 2009, the popularity of stings can be attributed to two main factors. One, given the scale of corruption in the country, it is sometimes the only way to extract truth, and two is scenario of excessive competition. It helps bring increased viewership to the media organization. Thakurta, a journalist and academic, asserts that such operations should only be done in public interest and ethical principles of fairness, accuracy and objectivity should follow in all stages: planning, conducting and editing. If a sting operation goes every and gets out hand, like Uma Khurana case, its consequences can be very serious. A reputation once blackened may never be salvaged. A career once jeopardized might be lost forever. In light of potential misuse of these undercover operations, in 2014, the Supreme Court remarked in a case Rajat Prasad versus CBI that unless there is motive of public interest behind the sting operation, it is not justifiable. As such, truth, accuracy and objectivity are among the basic tenets of journalism practice. But in India, distortion of news and subversion of truth continues unchecked. In a recent high-profile case, channels like Zee News, NewsX and India News aired doctored footage of an event held in Jawaharlal Nehru University on human rights. Violations in Kashmir on February 9, 2016. Anti-India slogans were dubbed on the footage and a campaign was carried out. But these news channels that the campus is the hub of anti-national students and activities. A journalist working at Zee News resigned and exposed the malicious fabrications being carried out by the channel. A forensic investigation later revealed that the videos were doctored, but in the meanwhile, other channels like Times Now played the videos constantly in the prime time as part of their Stop Anti-India campaign without any verification of their source and authenticity. The channels also made false accusations on a few JNU students, particularly those with Muslims' names. The coverage of the JNU episode should be seen a larger agenda of nationalism being propagated by certain political interests. Legitimate members of this nationalist project include predominantly male, upper caste sections, Dalits, minorities, tribals, women, and all liberal voices that speak for their constitutional rights are being branded as anti-national. This is visible in the brazen and horrifying growth in tolerance, vigilantism, false arrest, and mob lynching of these very sections with no justice in sight. Sadly, a big constituency of news media whose job is to expose such sinister agendas aimed at fracturing constitutional democracy, both in spirit and practice, is well entrenched in the plan. In the debate on intolerance, TV channels have systematically been stalking the Hindu-Muslim fires. The radical, subversive, conservative agenda of the channels that represent the corporate interest of their parent entities has been to target any rights-based discourse, any articulation of liberal opinion, and to vicious attack it. Human rights and civil society representatives are invited to shows and shouted down as traitors for questioning the government of the day without getting any opportunity to argue their views. Panelists who speak the language of peace and the need for negotiated political solutions to complex conflicts are quickly labeled as anti-national and unpatriotic sellouts, with media houses clearly saying that they are in the advertising business and not in news. The profit motive and serving dominant corporate political interest by bounding all counter forces that question their power seems inevitable. Perhaps this should not surprise us, and perhaps there is need to reconstitute our own normative assumptions and acceptations regarding the news media in view of the larger narrative of media corruption. As has been highlighted in the previous module, a number of scams and fraudulent practices within media have come into light in recent years. A prominent case in Radia tape controversy, wherein taped conversation between senior journalist and Neera Tadia, a lobbyist with the Ambanis and Tatas, about fixing a ministerial position for members of parliament from the DMK party, were released in the public domain. What was alarming about the tapes was not only its revelation of insidious nexus between political, corporate, and media interest, but also the larger media silence on the controversy, indicative of their complicity in similar practices. In another case, in 2012, a senior editors of Zee News were arrested for trying to extort rupees 100 crore from Naveen Jindal, chairman of Jindal Power and Steel Limited and member of parliament from the Congress party. In exchange, the channel offered to go soft in its coverage on company involvement in the coal scam. This was exposed when Jindal conducted a sting operation on the network. Following this, the Zee editor Sudhir Chaudhary was arrested but later released on bail. Syed explains the media corruption within the context of crony capitalism. She writes, "It is evident that crony capitalism is transforming journalism in India. This redefinition is not to one of the conscience keeper of society, but to that of business model that panders to vested interest in the name of journalism. It has, needless to say, a profound and telling impact on the news practice. Investigative journalism has vanished as paid news and editorials, where virtually everything is up for sale, much like its owners has sabotaged the news media space. This breed of news that relies more on high decibel visibility and devious sensationalism to earn profit impacts journalistic ethics negatively by its hegemonic, preposterous and ritualized subservice to the power structure being a derivative of the same ilk, and it is only getting more entrenched and deeply implanted. Given this context, what is required urgently is not regulation on media ownership and revenues, but also a statutory mechanism of media discourses. Unless there is transparency and accountability of media's financial operation, it cannot by any right investigate corrupt practices in other institutions. By apart from structural regulation, that regulation of news content, a thorny train also need to be regarded with seriousness. The Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, TRAI, is currently in charge of regulating the broadcasting industry, but content does not fall in its scope. News contents and regulation. A question that emerges is how news content should be regulated, and more importantly, who should do it. This section examines the possible options. One option is that both monitoring and regulation of news channel is undertaken by the government. There could be, however, cannot be an option worse than this, given that at least in theory, the role of news media in a democratic society is that of a watchdog, especially in a relation to governance. Any government intervention in news content would be direct breach of media's freedom. The clear danger is that the government would censor or silence any news outlet that scrutinize and criticize its policies and practices. In fact, this is not a mere conjecture, but is increasingly in evidence, particularly in the many arbitrary ban orders by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting on a number of news channels, such as the recent illegal ban on the 24-hour news channel NDTV India on accusation that is leaked sensitive strategic information. Between the years 2004-2016, at least 32 such ban orders have been made without any due process. At present, the government runs an electronic media monitoring center, EMMC, which keeps round the clock track of news content in television channels. And in absence of an independent statutory regulator on news content, the government often uses its power to gag its critics or those challenging its ideological agendas. Herein, a serious concern is that in the last few years, some channels have received notices from MIB for eligibly negative showcase of country's elected representative Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In 2005, Satyam TV, a Chennai-based Tamil language news and current affairs channel, received a show cause notice alleging that two of their broadcasts had portrayed Narendra Modi in a poor light. Similarly, 3 channels were issued show cause notices on why they should not face action for Yaqub Memem execution coverage. Among other actions, the INB ministry banned a documentary on beef and issued a notice to a Gujarat channel for sullying the image of Prime Minister. On June 5, 2017, the Central Bureau of Investigation (CBI) conducted a series of raids with targeting NDTV, one of the few channels abiding by its duty of scrutinizing the government in power. While the CBI says the raids were part of an investigation into the repayment of bank loans taken out by the network's owners, but editors and journalists around India call the NDTV raid a defining movement, a political attack on the network and on press freedom in times that have proven difficult for the media across the country. The intent of the present government is clear in its decision that soon all media would be scanned for negative news regarding the government. This would be done by proposed National Media Analytics Center (NMAC), which would carry out round-the-clock surveillance of every blog, website, news portal, TV channels, magazine and other forms of media by using tracking softwares. It would work directly under National Security Council Secretariat (NSCS), which is India's apex agency to monitor country's political, economic, energy and strategic security concerns. The idea is that every negative narrative would be countered by press release, briefings or press conferences by the government. That government plans to monitor and intervene in news content signals further curbs on the already shrinking media freedom in India. In recent years, violent attacks on journalists by the intolerant groups have been on the rise. According to International Committee to Protect Journalists (CPJ), 27 journalists in India have been killed for their work since 1992. Journalists most at risk are those hailing from small town journalists and investigating cases of corruption. The report said that no government in India has been an ardent champion of press freedom. Another report by Reporters Without Borders has revealed that press freedom is in peril or in very serious situation in 72 countries including India. If news regulation cannot be left to the government, the option then is of self-regulation by news industry itself. Self-regulation upholds independence of the press and is in practice in India through the agency of the News Broadcasters Association (NBA), a body of news industry professionals set up in 2008 to respond to complaints on news contents. It has its own code of ethics and Broadcasting Standards, which outlines principles of truth, accuracy, fairness, impartiality, objectivity, and sensitivity, along with safeguards on showcases of nudity and infringement of privacy, etc. The News Broadcasters Standards Authority (NBSA) is a jury of peers appointed by NBA to investigate the complaints regarding the violation of this code of ethics. There are few extant issues related to self-regulation which need to be discussed. Firstly, all news channels are not part of NBA and so do not come under its jurisdiction. Secondly, not all the cases which come to the association are addressed by 2012. Only 9 of the 239 complaints received by NBA were dealt with. Thirdly, the penalties imposed are not intended as a serious deterrent. For example, in 2008, India TV translated and aired an interview with a Pakistani analyst without mentioning its source, the news agency Reuters, and also tampered with the facts by saying that the analyst was a spy for the US government. The NBA imposed a fine of rupees 1 lakh on the channel. The channel withdrew its membership from the NBA after the decision and again got re-elected by the NBA for 2011-2012. What is a concern is that even though NBA has taken action in a number of cases of sensational misleading coverage, but it has failed to respond suo motu in significant others. For instance, the body did not give any advisory on irresponsible coverage of the Mumbai terror attacks in November 2008. Similarly, no response came from the body in February 2016 when leading channels ran unverified doctored videos to incite anger against the JNU students and community at large. A key issue also is that the NBA is only a standard body and does not have any statutory powers. It can at best the channel rupees 1 lakh or demand that it airs an apology for a short period. For instance, when India TV showed visuals of a gang rape in its Operation Gang Rape, it was let off with a simply warning for not following the guidelines of reporting a court proceedings and for interfering with the judicial investigation of the gang rape and the accused. What is the answer to the regulatory tangle? The answer perhaps lies in some mechanism of co-regulation between the industry and an independent regulator which has statutory powers. In 1995, the Supreme Court mandated for an independent regulator for broadcasting. In this vein, broadcast regulations including a content code were drafted and discussed in 1997, 2001 and 2007. This included a content code, but due to absence of any consensus between the industry and government on the same, the bills were subsequently shelved. Meanwhile, the orders by the NBA continue to come in parallel to the show cause notices by the government on grounds of violations of the Cable Television Networks Act of 1995. Occasionally, judicial appeals are made by affected parties. However, the cases go on for years. The delays often make the relief inconsequential. The conclusion is, since this satellite television has come into its own in India, news channels are being launched every year and the contest for TRPs and thereby revenues is getting tighter. The market forces combined with the regulatory vacuum has meant a systematic decline of independence and quality of television news journalism in India. The channels have adopted what have been the commercially successful practices of the West: sleaze, scandal, sensationalism, sting operations, voyeurism, hidden camera exposes, malice, and media trials. Despite long standing debates on journalistic ethics and responsibility and even attempts at regulation, predominant television's news media continues to race unabashedly along the path of profit, ever discovering the newer depths of frivolity. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. For more details, please read the module carefully and attempt the questions at the end. Thank you. On government orders, the channel was taken off air for a month. The CEO of the channel, Sudhir Chaudhary, was of course later taken as news head in Zee TV.